Yes, friends, it's true. The San Francisco Giants have signed Carlos Correa to a 13-year, $350 million contract. And when we did our podcast minutes after the signing was announced, we were a little bit giddy and maybe even manic. And so today, we're going to take a step back and rationally look at what exactly are the Giants getting in their new superstar, Carlos Correa.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, more about the Giants' new superstar, Carlos Correa. We're going to dig into the numbers. Dan Szymborski over at Fangraphs had a great write-up on the Carlos Correa signing and basically putting out his ZiPS projections for Correa over the next 13 years. So we're going to talk about what the player might look like in 10, 13 years. And it's better than you might think, actually, at the end of it. And in the beginning, it's as good as you might hope. We're also going to address these, in my opinion, insane comments coming out of MLB Network's Christopher Russo, Mad Dog Chris Russo, saying Correa's contract is going to be the worst in Giants history, which is, yeah, we'll break that one down a little bit. And then also talk about Correa the person. So jumping right into like the numbers, this is where I go. I mean, there's a lot. Obviously, a player is more than just their numbers, but the numbers are like, a reflection of the performance on the field. And so what better place to start than these ZiPS projections? This is a piece that's well worth reading by Dan Szymborski. The title is on Fangraphs, Carlos Correa gets his mega deal in San Francisco. And there's a lot to unpack in here, but just kind of jumping right in, Carlos Correa, according to the ZiPS projections, is going to be a 5+ WAR player over the next 3 years. Now, the huge, qualifier here is that projections don't always come true. This is just the best guess, an objective guess versus just a fan. When fans predict their own players, they always overpredict on, in general. So a projection system is a good place to go here. And a 5+ WAR player. That's the beauty of Carlos Correa being 28 years old, because for Aaron Judge, he starts at a higher level, but the decline starts immediately in terms of the projections. Whereas Correa being 28, he sustains this 5+ WAR level. And look, a lot goes into WAR, right? Like, it's basically the only reason I'm using it here is because it's one tidy number versus me telling you this is his 2023 batting average projection. This is 2024 batting average projection, blah, blah, blah. And then say this is on base projection. This is the slugging projection. This is the playing time projection, the defense projection. WAR just puts it all into one number, so it's much easier for me to communicate it that way. But if you go to the site, you can see what is that batting average projection, on base, slugging, everything, hits, doubles, triples, homers, strikeouts, walks, stolen bases, defensive runs above average. So that's why we're using WAR here, just because it's tidy. But anyway, 5+ WAR, that is one of the better players in the game on a consistent basis, and a guy who's always going to be in the mix to have an MVP type season. And in fact, if we look at his 2023 percentiles, this is saying the ZiPS projection system spits out like the average of the projections, but in a 95th percentile outcome, it has him as an 8 WAR player. In a 5th percentile outcome, one of the worst outcomes the computer can imagine, he's still at 2.7 wins above replacement, which ironically is the number that Thairo Estrada put up in 2022 when he led San Francisco Giants position players. So the almost worst outcome the computer can imagine is the best player from the 2022 Giants, best position player. Webb and Rodon were better than Estrada, by these kind of advanced metrics, but position player wise, it was Estrada who led the pack. And so this is good. And then if you look at year 4 and 5, he's projected over 4 wins above replacement in years 4 and 5. And then if you look at years 6 and 7, he's at over 3 wins above replacement. And only in year 8 does he fall to that 2.7 win projection, which is what Thairo Estrada put up. So we're talking in year 8, he would be at the level of the best position player on the 2022 Giants. Estrada had a good year, right? And I just want to reiterate, these are not gospel. I don't think these will not be right? Of course, baseball is not that easy to predict. These are just kind of the best guess we have, is essentially what a good projection system is. And I don't know, it's really strong because in year 10 of this deal, it still projects him at 2 wins above replacement, which is about an average major league everyday player. So in year 10, projecting to be an average major league player is quite good news for the Giants, if that was true. And at no point does this go negative, whereas it did with Aaron Judge if you start looking at past 9 years. So that's the beauty of starting it earlier. Yes, it's more years, but those years are on the front end as opposed to the back end of an Aaron Judge deal. Also within this column by Dan Szymborski, he points out, one thing he points out is that the ZiPS projection system estimates that on a 13-year deal that it would cost $382 million. So actually, ZiPS is saying this is kind of a bargain for the San Francisco Giants, believe it or not. But also in here, Dan Szymborski is saying that at something like 42.4 remaining WAR projected for Carlos Correa, and you assume Fernando Tatis Jr. is not a shortstop anymore. They just signed Xander Bogaerts, so it appears that's the case, and they're going to move him to the outfield. So if you consider those two things, it actually has Correa having eventually the best career of any active shortstop in the game, and putting up 42.4 more WAR with the Giants. And that, combined with what he's done already in his career, would make him a Hall of Fame player. And so it's not like a totally outlandish thought to think that Carlos Correa could end up in the Hall of Fame and wearing a Giants hat on his plaque. So that's lofty expectations, but also computer projection systems are not like, they don't live in the realm of fantasy and like overdoing it in terms of what to expect. They're pretty conservative in general. And so saying he's going to be of all current active shortstops, he's going to have the best career when all is said and done is good news if you're a fan of the San Francisco Giants. So there's really nothing in here. I would really encourage you to read the whole thing. It's hard for me to, summarize every point, but this is a good read if you're a Giants fan, and it's great news. And Carlos Correa is a San Francisco Giant, and yes, there are injury concerns, right? And injuries could throw these projections out the window, but they do factor in potential injuries. Like if you look at year 10, it only has him at 384 at bats, which if you combine that with what goes into plate appearances, which at bats are always fewer than plate appearances, walks and sacrifice hits and all that, he's not playing that much in terms of this projection. But hey, you could miss like a whole season. That type of thing is possible. But it's the best we have, and it's a darn good projection for Carlos Correa, and it is very exciting. And that Hall of Fame thing, look, he might not ever get in because of the 2017 thing, but that's a reality. And hey, it'd be the next Barry Bonds type situation where a guy could be deserving, but the Hall of Fame keeps him out. But I don't know. I read this and I look at this, and it's just very, very exciting. So coming up in just a minute, there's more numbers, not just based on ZiPS. I want to talk about platoon splits. I think some people, I'm not sure anyone believes that the Giants, they're not platooning Carlos Correa, but I think some people maybe think that they could, but they just definitely won't. We'll talk about why, get into the career platoon splits, and how many of his career home runs would have been home runs at Oracle Park, and what does that overall spray chart look like for Carlos Correa? What kind of a hitter is he when he hits the ball? Does he hit the ball all over the field? Is he a pull hitter? We'll get into it in just a minute, but before we do, You're hanging out with some friends, putting back a few drinks, a few becomes a few too many, and as the evening comes to an end, people start heading out. You think of calling for a ride, but nah, you live nearby, you can make it home okay, it's no big deal, right? What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway, and even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car. What about if you kill someone? Everybody knows the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, as promised, more Carlos Correa to the San Francisco Giants. It hasn't been officially announced yet, which doesn't really mean much because it's happening. Like if you look at Carlos Correa's Twitter account, he changed his background picture to Oracle Park. If you look at his Instagram, he followed like a bunch of Giants people, including the team itself. And there's also a video that he put out of him like hugging his dad. Clearly, like I bet you he had just signed the contract, and so we don't know exactly why. Physical needs to be taken, all that stuff. Maybe the Giants have to make corresponding 40-man moves, and so it could be they don't want to have to make that move just yet, or they're working on something like a trade that could clear a 40-man spot before they're forced to do so by officially signing Correa. But it's happening. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. Hey, I was on Locked On Sports Today. Check it out. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. So yeah, there's more to get to. I just like platoon splits are an interesting thing to look at. And I know that with the Giants specifically, and a lot of times fans, understandably, like one of the main problems with the 2022 Giants was they just didn't have any everyday players kind of establish themselves. They hoped that like Darren Ruff would be more of an everyday player. They hoped Mike Yastrzemski would be more of an everyday player. Brandon Crawford was an MVP caliber player the year prior, and they certainly hoped he would be a good everyday player, but it just didn't really happen. They didn't have that kind of performance from anybody that justified having them in there every day, a lot of times because their guys have huge platoon splits. Like Jock Peterson, as great as he was against righties, he's never, ever been good against lefties over any kind of sustained period, and so he is a platoon player. Whereas Carlos Correa, and the contract reflects it. You're not giving a guy a $350 million contract to be platooned. Mitch Haniger, by the way, also not a platoon player. So they've done it. They've added a couple of everyday players. I hope they add one or two more, but it's a good start. So the career splits, I mean, Carlos Correa is just an absolute monster against left-handed pitching. He, in his career, has hit .291 with a .386 on base percentage and .482 slugging against left-handed pitching. That's a 140 weighted runs created plus. Walk rate is 13.5% against lefties, and strikeout rate is just 17.5%. So when those numbers start converging and your walk rate is kind of sort of almost as high as your strikeout rate, that is a good thing, folks. And that's where he is against left-handed pitching. So here's the big reveal, because obviously there's more right-handed pitchers in the game. So how does he do against those same-handed pitchers? Well, how about this? A .274 batting average, a .346 on base, and a .477 slugging, good for a 125 weighted runs created plus. If you look at a player like Jock Peterson, he has that kind of production against righties as a lefty. And then the numbers against lefties are like a 70 weighted runs created plus. And for those who don't know, I get the question a lot. What is weighted runs created plus? It's just an all-encompassing offensive metric. 100 is always equal to league average in a specific year. And so if you're at like 125, it means that you have produced 25% above average offense. If you're at 70% below average offense. and just general offense. And it's like weighting the different offensive outcomes appropriately, giving you the right credit for a homer versus a double versus a walk versus an out, and on and on. So, yeah, I mean, Correa has platoon splits, but he's significantly better than league average against both. The walk rate, by the way, 9.6% against righties, and the strikeout rate 21.7%. So you can see how it's not as good, but still the numbers are good. They're just if Carlos Correa comes up against a lefty in a big spot, look out. And all of this is great, but then when you combine it with the fact that he's a good defensive shortstop, that's what really takes him over the top and makes him a star level player. And the age, I mean, it's just a great this is great news for the San Francisco Giants that they have this guy essentially locked up for the rest of his career. Maybe a better fit in some ways than Aaron Judge, and I'm not the only one saying that. So let's look at some other numbers. I looked at the career hits overlaid at Oracle Park. I thought that was really interesting. He really is a line-to-line hitter. If you look at the career hits, I put it out on Twitter if you want to find it there, at Ben Kaspick. He's got, doubles that are hit, a lot of doubles down the left field line, a lot of doubles down the right field line. He's got a lot of doubles in the gaps. So spraying the ball all over the field. His singles spray chart is literally sprayed all over the diamond, and even the home runs. So he just hits the ball all over the field all the time. And so you might think, oh, that's not so great for home runs. And you're right. At Oracle Park, right field, if you're hitting the ball to right, and especially right center, you're not going to get homers on those balls, but you're going to get probably extra base hits on a lot of them. Hopefully it doesn't hurt him too much. But I will just point out, if you look at the career home runs for Correa, he's got 149 career homers. And according to Statcast, if all of those balls that had been homers elsewhere were like hit at Oracle Park, and according to Statcast, they account for different wall heights, distances, and environmental effects. When you're watching a game these days and they show you the wind patterns and all that, and they can show you how many feet a fly ball loses if you're hitting it into this specific weather conditions, climate, whatever conditions. We're pretty good at these days being able to tell what would have been a home run and what wouldn't. And anyway, 149 actual home runs. If all of those balls had been hit at Oracle, or just all of the balls he's ever hit in general, actually, if they were hit at Oracle, he would have only 122 home runs. So he's losing, almost 30 home runs there, according to these numbers. But if you look at the last few years where the Giants have changed the dimensions of their field, some have said that they put up the things in right field and that changed the wind patterns. I don't buy that. I think it was more that the Giants' offense got better, because I've looked at how did the road teams do relative to previous years, and the road teams didn't really change. It was the Giants who changed. And so I think it's more that the hitting coaches helped the players get better, and that changed it. And also, of course, the center field dimensions being shorter did have an effect. But if you look at, 2020, he hit 11 home runs. 10 of them would have been home runs at Oracle. In 2021, he had 27 home runs. Only 20 of them would have been home runs at Oracle. In 2022, 22 home runs he hit and 24 home runs at Oracle. And so overall, it's, what is that, 54 at Oracle, and it's hard to do 58 in reality. And so losing 4 home runs over a 3-season span is not that big of a deal. And so I think he's going to be fine. He's not a guy who hits 40 home runs or even 30 home runs necessarily. I certainly wouldn't be shocked if he had a season in which he hit 30 home runs. But what he has done, if you look at it, is he's hit 20 plus home runs in 6 out of 8 seasons, full seasons. It's actually 6 out of 7. Or he's only not done it once. The only other time was in 2020 when it was a 60-game season. But other than that, it was only 2018 when he didn't hit at least 20 home runs. So he's not going to wow you, but he is consistently hitting a pretty high number of home runs. And he's also going to... The thing is, too, batting average, I said this on the podcast when they first signed him, we need to stop thinking of 300 as a good average. And in fact, as we transition in a minute to talking about Christopher Russo saying this is going to be the worst contract in Giants history, part of what he said is he's only a career 279 hitter, which you're way overemphasizing batting average by using batting average as the number to define a player there in terms of their offensive ability. And 279 is super high in today's game, like super high. League average right now is like 240 something, 243, and he's at career 280 essentially. And so it's way, way better than average. We need to adjust expectations for the different environment in which we live these days. Batting average has gone down dramatically. And so, yeah, that's the reality of the situation. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to address those comments by Christopher Russo. I'm going to explain why they're wrong. And we're going to talk about Carlos Correa, the person, a little bit. So all of that in just a second. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting, news, info, stats, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love podcasts, and I think you do, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. They've had lots of great offseason odds. Carlos Correa to the Giants at one point was a long shot, and we kind of said, hey, maybe you want to check that out, especially if they don't get Aaron Judge. Those Carlos Correa odds are going to shoot up, and man, that's exactly what happened. And then, in fact, the odds were onto something at that point when the Giants do, in fact, land Carlos Correa. So if you listen to this show, you're often going to get maybe a slight edge on some of these things that BetOnline is putting out. So you can listen to us and check it out. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, here we go. We are going to discuss these comments by Christopher Russo. I don't exactly have them pulled up just because I couldn't stand to look at them anymore because they were that annoying. And, you know, I heard Christopher Russo was talking to Susan Slusser on his show at the winter meetings, and his take at the time just made no sense to me. I don't want to be like disrespectful here, but just being kind of objective, it didn't make any sense at all what he was saying. He said when Judge went back to the Yankees, he went off talking about how that's why the Giants were in so much trouble because they shouldn't have even pursued Judge because of course he was going to go back to the Yankees. And then in the same breath, he tried to say that, and by pivoting to Carlos Correa, because Susan Slusser has continued to suggest, or did for a long time, and now she was right, suggest that Carlos Correa was the next best option for the Giants. And he said, how are they going to, that's just nonsense. They're not going to be able to convince their fans that this is a good enough player to justify like how much of a star that they wanted. So how does that make any sense to say in one breath, they shouldn't have pursued Judge at all because, of course, he was going back to the Yankees. And then in the other breath saying that, I mean, I can't even think clearly about it because it doesn't make any sense at all, that he doesn't think Carlos Correa is worth this kind of money. And what Christopher Russo is doing is he's stuck in the past where to him, like average and home runs and RBIs are how you evaluate an offensive player. And I think he's also failing to account for the fact that Correa plays a premium position and plays it very, very well. And so it, you know, like a good defensive shortstop is very different than a average defensive first baseman. Like the bar is much higher for the first baseman. Like they need to be, if they have Carlos Correa's offensive numbers, they're a fine and solid player, but they're not a superstar. But if you're a good defensive shortstop with these type of offensive numbers, you're a superstar. And at the age that he is too, and you're not expecting decline, I think he's also not factoring in the age and that you're getting prime years for like 4 more years and then good years for like 7 more years. And so, but actually, I mean, if you read the comments, because this is up on NBC Sports Bay Area, Russo says he's a great player, he's a star, and he's fantastic. But then in the same breath, he's saying it's going to be the worst contract in Giants history. So I don't know if he's just looking for attention at this point, but those comments make no sense. And, you know, everything else you read, I think, has made a lot more sense. Keith Law of The Athletic wrote about how Carlos Correa was the top free agent in this class. He has him ahead of Aaron Judge because of, he had a lot of players ahead of Aaron Judge. I think that's a little bit too far to go, but I get it when you're talking about the duration of the contract. And Keith Law says it's the best possible fit for the Giants, and I kind of agree. ESPN, somebody wrote a piece that I thought was really nice and objective, giving a grade to the signing, and they had a lot of solid points. There was no fluff, no drama, overly dramatic sentiments, and they gave it a grade of an A. And the Zips write-up that I was referring to at first is high on this contract. I'm high on this contract. So don't listen to Christopher Russo on this point. I don't pay much attention to him in general, but on this point saying, and he's like, I don't care if they never talk to me again after saying this, but it's horrible, it's awful, it's the worst thing they've ever done. Insane. Makes no sense. So moving on, let's turn the page from that. I want to just briefly mention Carlos Correa, the person. I've had people say to me that he's hated in the game. He's not at all hated in the game. He's very well respected. He elevates others. He is a mentor to young players. It's extremely valuable to have this guy in their organization. Yes, the 2017 stuff, and we'll at some point dive more into exactly what went into that and why I think it shouldn't really be that much of a concern at this point in time, and that the Dodgers are the ones that more than anyone are upset about this 2017 stuff, and that adds fuel to the rivalry. But I just wanted to mention, I mentioned just a second ago that Russo is using overly reliant on average home runs and RBI, I think, to evaluate a hitter, whereas in today's game, you know, what I'm talking about, weighted runs created plus, even something simpler, which is basically the same like OPS plus, it's just on base plus slugging, and then the plus means it's essentially scaled so that league average equals 100 and is park adjusted. But Carlos Correa himself will tell you this stuff. He is a smart player in the modern game. He is someone who embraces and understands the analytics that we talk about all the time. He will talk to you about WAR. He will talk to you about weighted runs created plus. He'll talk to you about on-base percentage being super important and not chasing out of the strike zone. He is very smart and very kind of embraces the modern analytics of the game. And I think that that can have a very positive effect in buy-in from the rest of the Giants. And hopefully for me, things like on the scoreboard even, not just having average home runs RBI. I think it's kind of embarrassing that the Oracle Park scoreboard, the three numbers they show prominently are still average home runs and RBI. For a team like the Giants that knows very well that those numbers are by far no longer that relevant in terms of evaluating performance, give us at least average on base slugging and then below it home runs RBI. And I think Correa is the type of guy, not that this is like my petty thing, but he would maybe say to Farhan Zaidi, like, hey, come on, can we get some better metrics up there? I don't want to be looking at these old, outdated numbers for evaluation. And more importantly, I think he's going to help the team kind of understand how the front office evaluates them and help the players be better by saying, this is what you need to do if you want that big contract. You need to get better in these areas. And just a leader for Latin players and English-speaking players alike. I think he's able to it's just fantastic. I think it's a great signing, and the Giants nailed it with this contract. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen. For your next listen, check out Locked On Sports Today from the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. Coming up tomorrow, either a mailbag, we've also got a crossover with Millard Thomas from Locked On D-backs in the works, so look out for one of those. Thanks again for listening today. You are now Locked On Giants.